Now it is up to the jury. Deliberations started Friday afternoon in the corruption trial of Senator Bob Menendez and his two co-defendants. It was a week that a fiery Menendez and his legal team were tearing into the DOJ. Well, the question, of course, is what the jury believes based on the evidence. Joining me now with his perspective and expert analysis, criminal defense attorney Rocco Cipparone, former federal prosecutor in the District of New Jersey and an adjunct professor at Rutgers Law School. Rocco, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you, Eric.
Let's rip off the Band-Aid, okay? After 9 weeks, do you think that there was sufficient evidence to convict on at least some of the charges?
You know, that's really hard to Monday morning quarterback when you're not sitting in the courtroom day to day. I think both sides scored a lot of points throughout the trial from what I was able to follow. Look, the things that are going to be difficult for Menendez are the fact that his fingerprints literally were on the cash and the gold bars. That was a trail to his house. They were in his pockets. That's a difficult, cadre of evidence to get around. On the other side of that, the defense scored some points with respect to the credibility of the government's star witness. He's had a lot of baggage that this government had to contend with and the jury will wrestle with. And he tried to distance himself by his wife. That strategy could go either way, but I think he made some inroads there, too.
In this week's closing, Menendez's defense attorney said, quote, "There is no text, not a recording, no photo that shows Senator Menendez taking a bribe." And he told the jurors that they're being asked to infer that evidence, such as the $480,000 in cash, the couple's home, along with the gold bars found in Nadine's closet, belonged to Bob. The defense said that the inferences they want you to draw are shifty and said that you must acquit because you can't prove that Bob took anything. How do you view that part of the closing, that characterization? Are these inferences or are they ironclad evidence here?
Inferences are never ironclad, right? They're what we call circumstantial evidence. The jury's got to get from point A to point C without necessarily having point B. That said, that's not uncommon in a lot of criminal trials. I think juries get used to the CSI kind of crime story type of evidence where you have to have that hard and fast text message, wiretap recording. That doesn't exist here, and that favors Menendez. But it's not uncommon for juries to be asked to rely on inferences. And if they're reasonable and rational inferences, the jury's told you can and should rely on them, but you have to use your common sense in assessing the rationality of those inferences. So again, that's kind of a toss-up. I think the defense had some points without the fact that there wasn't any direct evidence that Menendez took a bribe. But you're never going to have pictures, or very rarely, except in an undercover sting, of someone taking a bribe, right? That's always done clandestinely. It's done in the shadows. So that's not uncommon in cases like this.
The DOJ, in their rebuttal to the defense's closing, really tried to hammer home their case and the claims that not only did Menendez take bribes, that he acted as a foreign agent for Egypt. We've heard that over and over again. And they highlighted the texts in which they say that Menendez passed along sensitive information that wasn't public about the American embassy in Egypt. Was there enough to prove guilt on the charge of acting as a foreign agent, do you think?
I think that's one of the more difficult charges for the government without, and we talked about this before, without them establishing that quid pro quo, that there was an action taken in reaction to a bribe. That's the tough spot for the government. And that's really potentially lacking here. And look, they loaded on about 16 charges on Menendez. They're hoping that something sticks. They range from more serious to less serious. And that's a common technique, especially of the federal government, to overcharge and hope to have something stick. But I think that particular charge is going to be a little bit difficult for the government unless they can couple those things, the action and reaction.
Listen, if you were in that courtroom, what do you think, if you're in the jury box, what's the most compelling or perhaps unambiguous piece of evidence presented by the DOJ?
I think the most compelling evidence is the fact that the gold bars, the cash, the car, those things are all obvious to Menendez. And it's a difficult hurdle to get around, even though he's blaming his wife. And he got, I don't want to say lucky because it's an unfortunate medical condition that led to the severance, but he got a break by being able to try the case and point the finger at his wife who's not sitting in the courtroom. But that may be hard for a jury to believe, that his wife was able to orchestrate all of this without him knowing, especially when those gold bars and cash and cars were all visible to him and when these connections were all pretty well established by the government.
How strong do you feel the senator's defense was here? It was nowhere near as lengthy as the prosecution's case.
Yeah, and it's rare that the defense is as long as the prosecution's case, by the way. I think he put forth good efforts. I think he put forth strong efforts. For example, I'm not convinced by this whole, well, because he rang a bell for his wife one time, that means she was a patsy and she was really just a conduit of his actions, and that it couldn't be the other way around. I think they put forth an aggressive defense. He has very good lawyers. They were very aggressive. The government's key witness leaves a lot to be desired. But these are tough situations to call. It really comes down to, does a jury think that Menendez's fingerprints, literally and figuratively, were all over this bribery scheme, or was it just his wife along with these other guys?
So with 9 weeks of testimony, you mentioned the key witness in Jose Uribe. How long do you think it might take the jury to reach a verdict in a case such as this one, where there are so many counts as well?
If they're doing their job and truly deliberating and truly having an open discussion, I think it's going to be days. This is a long trial. There's a lot of evidence. There were, I think, 36 or 37 witnesses. So if they're going to really deliberate in the true spirit of that word, I don't think this is going to be a quick verdict. We've seen that in Menendez's other trials. I mean, the juries have favored him at least at some point, or at least hung in the last case that he tried. So I think there's a real possibility this deliberation goes for days, and probably should go for days if they're really assessing the evidence and lack of it.
Would you be surprised if he was found guilty on some counts and not guilty on others?
I will not be surprised at that. That happens a lot as well. Sometimes juries, for lack of a better term, not that they should, compromise, and where they can't reach decisions on more difficult counts, they might compromise and reach decisions on lesser counts to resolve the matter. And there might be some, for lack of a better term, horse trading in the jury room. And that's very common, that people are acquitted of the most serious charges and found guilty of lesser charges. For example, maybe obstruction of justice, which is after the fact. They may find them not guilty of the bribery or being a foreign agent, but they could find them guilty of some lesser things. That's not uncommon. And federal juries are more prone to conviction than an acquittal, in my experience, and the statistics show that.
Rocco Cipparone, thank you so much for your time and for your insight. Appreciate it.
Oh, always glad to be here, Eric. Thank you.
And of course, stay with News 12 on air, online, and via the News 12 app. When the jury does reach a verdict, we're going to bring that to you.